following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Bronx Roots, Michael Preminger and David Hubler. I'm Ralph Tycho, the half-Bronxite from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. They let me in on a pass because of my grandparents were lucky enough to raise me partially in the Bronx. And so here's
it's more like a passport than a pass, you know.
Right. A visa, a temporary asylum.
Right.
And I didn't have to break down any walls either, which is nice.
That's nice.
We're back. Great show last week, Michael. I really appreciate that. We missed David, but I got to get to know you a little bit, and
really you're still letting me back, huh?
Yes.
Well, again, the same kind of we make the special dispensation for all of us at some level. Before we go any further, let me congratulate your son, David's son, Rob, just won an Emmy Award for news coverage, local news coverage of the Parkland shooting in Florida. And tell us about that a little bit, if you would. I know you're quelling this week. David.
Yeah, we were, you know, Rob doesn't confide in us too often until things are sorted out. We woke up this morning thinking, well, they hadn't won, because we said, call us, you know, let us know what happened. And he didn't call this morning. So when I opened Facebook, there was his picture with the group that had won it. So that's how we found out. And, you know, for years I said we'd find out if Rob was getting married when we saw the notice in the newspaper.
In the Times. Remember
yeah, he
the
doesn't.
Times that debutantes and what have you would
come out.
And that kind of socialization has been taken over by Facebook and Instagram and the rest of it. Good and bad. The age we live in for a number of reasons. But again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Your wife too. What's your wife's first name?
Becky.
Rebecca. Okay. Well, she the mama, so give her.
I will.
Big hug and congratulations from everybody at Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.
Thank you. I will do that.
All right. What do you guys want to talk about? Should we talk about Bush, the late Herbert Bush, and his passing? And it's kind of.
Well, we could mention it. I think it's worth mentioning.
Okay. What are your memories?
I didn't realize that because in reading about coverage and his past, I know he played baseball, right, for Yale?
Yep.
Right?
Yes,
right?
He did.
We talked about that earlier on another podcast. He was first baseman for Yale, and David, you had a very interesting story about his baseball glove. Oh,
yeah, it's not my story, but I can relate it. First of all, his Yale baseball team won 2 national championships. We didn't mention that. Yeah, and this was prior to the war. No, I'm sorry. This was after the war, just after the war, because he didn't go to Yale until his military service was completed. Yeah, there's a classic story that was confirmed in the Washington Post today. There was always a story that Bush, he played first base. They always that he carried his glove around with him wherever he went. And Tom Boswell, who is the Washington Post primary baseball writer, who's been doing it for many years, and he's quite good, wrote a column today He and Bush had become friendly over the years for various reasons, and Bush once invited him to the White House when he was president, and as he tells the story, while he was sitting there, he said, he asked the president this story that he'd heard that George Herbert Walker Bush carried the glove. He says, so where is it? The president opens a drawer in his desk drawer, and he takes out the glove. It was right there in the White House Oval Office with him, and he said it was highly, lubricated and ready to use. He flexed, it was the first baseman's glove. So the story was true.
Was that George or the glove that was highly lubricated?
Good question. No, I don't know. No, it wasn't. It was the glove.
Okay. Hey, you mentioned Thomas Boswell. If I'm not mistaken, he wrote a book called Heart of the Order.
Probably so.
He came out in the 80s, and it one of the greatest baseball books ever written.
Well, I'll have to take a look at it. No, I didn't know.
Yeah, terrific author. Let's talk about your exploits a little bit, talking about your number one book, your number one project of a lifetime, I think. And that's a baseball book, The Nats and the Grays. And we haven't talked about that much on this show.
And not too much on any other show, as a matter of fact. Whether cable or TV or radio or...
Okay, well, then let's do it now.
Let's do it now. First of all, how did it come about that you wrote the book? Let us...
Yeah, you would think as a lifelong Yankees fan, I would have written something about the Yankees. But what started it was actually looking at some of the wartime years. It turns out that a lot of the players who played, they weren't called scabs because they really weren't, but they were not of the caliber of the players the big name stars who had gone off to war. And so it dawned on me that, there must be some of these guys out there now getting old who played maybe 1, 2, 3 years, maybe maximum, in the major leagues, and then just disappeared off the face of the earth because the pros, the real pros, came back and replaced them. And so for some of these guys, it was probably the highlight of their life to actually travel around the major leagues and play Major League Baseball. So I thought of it as a novel, and I did a lot of research. At the time, I spoke to, through the Baseball Hall of Fame, I got the names and the phone numbers of some of these guys, spoke to them. Most of them were absolutely thrilled to talk about it because these were the guys who really were totally unknown. They just played. And I wanted to do Washington, and I chose one year, 1944. Anyway, skipping ahead, I could not find anyone interested in the book, even local area.
First, you thought of it as a novel, and what made it go nonfiction in your mind?
Well, it didn't go nonfiction in my mind at all. I decided I'll try a couple of local publishers, maybe the D.C. area publisher. There are a couple would be more interested and more inclined to publish it. And I found a Roman and Littlefield, which is a large publishing outfit in Lanham, Maryland, which is a suburb of D.C. And I pitched it to their acquisitions editor, who came back and I sent her some of the stuff I had written, and she said, I really like how this is, but we don't do fiction. We're strictly a nonfiction house. Would you consider writing it again as a nonfiction and maybe include all the war years, from 41, 42 on through 45 or so? And I had just been relieved of my full-time position as an editor at the Tech Publishing Company, and I really had nothing else to do. So I said, well, yeah, I can do that. And so that started me on research which turned out to be very, very interesting. I think a lot of people give the war years short shrift when it comes to sports teams, and especially baseball, which at the time was still the number one sport in America. And so when I finally got to writing it, there were so many little incidents. For example, things don't change as much as we think they do. When Congress passed the law that restricted driving and restricted the number of gallons of gasoline people could purchase during the war, they exempted themselves from this restriction. You know, everybody else had to buy like I forget how many gallons. You know, but if you were in Congress, the sky's the limit. You could have as much gas as you needed. And I thought, you know, that's so typical of what
it has not changed today.
No.
Wow.
You know, and then there was, I was reading the the Washington Post, and it was like 1942 and 1943, I forget which year, but it was in December, and they were predicting, one day's paper said, you know, there was going to be a snowstorm in the area. And so now here's a snowstorm that's coming into Washington. D.C. is notorious for not being able to handle snow, any amount of snow, and they can't handle it. Marion Barry, Mayor for Life, was famous for two things. One for snorting some snow, which got him into real trouble, and the other was for when they asked him, you know, how was he was vacationing somewhere during a snowstorm, and they asked him how was he going to handle the snowstorm, and he said April. So I read the story that there was going to be a snowstorm. Now keep in mind that not only, you know, was driving restricted because of the gasoline rationing, but also there weren't that many cars in Washington to begin with. If you saw any movies of wartime Washington, the streets were empty. There were virtually no cars on the road. I remember watching. They made a Sherlock Holmes movie with Basil Rathbone and I forget who played Dr. Watson, but it was sort of updated to the present, and they set it in Washington during the war, and so they had scenes, and there were no cars on the streets. There was, you could sit down there on Pennsylvania Avenue and picnic, and nobody would bother you. But anyway, right. So the next day, the storm dropped less than a half an inch of snow, and there were reports of accidents all over town. Automobile accidents. You know, you couldn't make this stuff up. It was all
Washington a city that is car dependent, or basically are you public transportation?
Well, that's a good question. We of course have the Metro, which I've always referred to as the Tunaville trolley. If anyone who remembers those old comic strips, but they also relied a lot on trolleys, electric trolleys that used to run through the city, segregated, by the way, and so they have had, but. They have had mass transit and bus lines too, of course, but Washington in winter is a deadly place to be, only because when it does snow, you are stuck. I mean, people just don't know how to drive in snow here, and so here it was 1942, 1943 with a handful of cars on them, and they were still involved in accidents, you know.
That's so funny. So, but first of all, how did people get around when they say there were very few cars on the road?
Well, there were buses. There was bus service, and there was trolley service. And at that time, and I'm going back. I mean, I remember as a kid coming down here to visit I had two uncles, my mother's brothers, who lived down here and worked for the federal government, and we would come down in the summer, and I remember actually riding on a trolley once. So there was transportation, and there wasn't, and even the buses ran out into the suburbs. And so the transportation wasn't a problem. And of course, as more and more people had cars, of course, it got more and more congested. Whereas now, next to L.A., this is the number 2 most congested travel area.
Is that right,
in the country.
Washington?
Yeah, it really is. And once the Amazon people move in here, it's going to get even worse. So.
I invite you to maybe look for an update on those statistics and look into the Bay Area and the traffic in the Bay Area and the congestion. I don't know if Washington has gotten worse or the Bay Area has gotten better since your statistics came out, but it's horrible here in the Bay Area.
I know. And you top us in terms of cost of living, in terms of housing and things like that. You're still on top. But DC is changing so rapidly. It's just remarkable what's going on here. One thing I want to make a point of, since this is supposedly has to deal with some issues in the Bronx. One of the great innovations in New York City was when the New York City subway system was built well over 100 years ago now. They didn't do what they did here in Washington. It just built it into areas that were built up. They built all the way out to the far reaches of Brooklyn and into the northern portions of the Bronx, where Mike and I come from. And there were very few people that lived up there in those days. You're talking about the late 1890s or so. But the subway system and of course the elevated were easier to build since they didn't have to tunnel. But the foresight of these early developers and city officials to build this extensive subway system that was remarkable, because it brought in people who didn't need a car because they had the subway. My father didn't have a car for a good number of years, and then when he did get one, it was only to drive us on the weekends. He never drove to work in Wall Street from the northern end of the Bronx. It would have taken all day. But the elevated Mosholu Parkway station was right there.
You tell a great story, David, about parking an alternate side of the parking.
Oh, God.
Alternate side of the road, and how that affects people's lives.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Your thought process, where am I going to park tomorrow, and what's happening? But you briefly touched on the idea of the building of these areas. Were they not just New York, not just Bronx and to Brooklyn, but were in all cities, you build a mass transit system, and you're going to either deliberately or not deliberately exclude areas, and it will affect them for years in terms of growth.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Do you find that to be true in New York, in the history of the subway system? Where
I don't know.
Mike
and I haven't lived there in a long time.
When you say exclude areas, what?
Well, for instance, in Washington, you mentioned, David, when they built this system,
the metro system, yeah.
The Georgetown area was excluded from that.
Right.
Now, was that deliberate, or was it politics? The representation from that area just wasn't strong enough to.
Oh, no. I mean, you're talking about the planning was into the late 1950s. They started digging in the early 60s, and the fear was in Georgetown that a subway system would open Georgetown and other residential areas to crime from people in other areas coming down into Georgetown through easy access on the metro. They were fearful of that. Northern Virginia, in the original plan, because I saw it and I lived it. Northern Virginia had like 5 stations spread out over the entire county when they first started. And they were at opposite ends. If you think of the county as being a rectangle, 2 or 3 of them were on the top, let's say the top end, and the other side, I'll say it is like home plate. 2 of the stations were on the left-hand side, and the other 3 were on the right-hand side, or something like that. The center of the county, from the pitcher's mound to home plate, let's say, they got nothing. There were no stations, and it has an effect even to this day, because had they built a subway line, a metro line, or underground line directly down the center of Fairfax County, they would have eliminated so much bad traffic. Because people would be able to get on. Since then, though, they've made adjustments. They've sent Metro now has a station at National Airport, and they're building one. They're building the line out to Dulles International Airport. So they're making progress. But all this has cost a fortune to do, and but that's why I feel that the New York system was so far ahead of its time in building stations where so few people actually lived at the time.
That is so interesting. I never realized that.
Yeah.
And then the communities grew up around the station.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the stations were built also in some places, including New York. The end of the line was where the big moguls, that's where the Ebbets Field was, the end of the line. That's why they were called the trolley dodgers, because that was the end of the system. That was where the end was. The Polo Grounds had a station, 155th Street station.
Right.
Yankee Stadium, 161st Street station. So all of these, they afforded many more people the opportunity to go to sporting events.
Right. It's amazing how it was one station stop that separated the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, 150.
Right across the Harlem River. And
that's right.
But do you remember how you had to get there? If you lived, say, on where Mike and I lived, on in the Mosholu Parkway end of it, you had to get off.
Did you take the elevator train to get there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The L.
We took that from Valentine Avenue or from Bedford to get to Yankee.
Bedford Park. Yeah. Okay. If you took that train.
You're talking about how to get to Yankee Stadium?
No, I'm talking about how to get to the Polo Grounds.
Oh, yeah. You had a. That's right.
Do you remember? You got off at, I think it was at the Yankee Stadium stop, and then a train would pull in, and you'd get on it, and it would start forward, and then it would go into a curve. You could actually see the train sitting there waiting for its time to come into the. So what would happen was you'd go down to 161st Street, and the train would then swing around over the bridge and into Manhattan and deposit you at 155th Street, where the Polo Grounds was. And that's all it did. It just made this loop back and forth. It wasn't even a full loop. It just went an arc. And that was how you had to get to the Polo Grounds. So you had to change trains to go one stop.
Now, unless you were on the D train, the D train would be the very next station.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
155th Street. And for us, it was great because we had in the Bronx, we had both the underground IND station and the IRT elevated station, both stopping at 161st Street and River Avenue, Yankee Stadium. Mm-hmm. And in those days, the fare was 15 cents, and you could save another 15 cents if when you got off, let's say you got off the elevated platform, you took a transfer. The transfers were just paper transfers, and they were sitting there on the ledge where the guy who sold you the tokens was. So you would take a transfer, you go down, see the ball game, and then you go to the other train line and turn in the transfer and go home. So it took you, so instead of spending all of 30 cents, you were only spending 15 cents for your round trip.
Right. Now, this is in the pre-token days.
No, this is in the token days.
Oh,
but you had to go out. Oh, there was no connection between the two trains. You had to go outside from one to the other. And what you did was you took this paper transfer.
And I got you.
And then then when you went into the other line, you turned it into a guy who was standing there.
Yeah.
Because the idea was that you weren't going to be paying a double fare. Let's say you were going to go down to 161st Street on the elevated line and then take the subway line downtown. So you shouldn't have to pay another 15 cents. That's why you got the transfer. But once you were in the station, nobody knew that you were going to cross the platform and go back north.
Right.
We had all of these.
Anybody listening, those were the days when a scorecard cost 10 cents.
That's right. That's right.
They give you a pencil for a nickel, if I remember.
A nickel. You're absolutely right, Ralph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember transfers on the buses.
Yes, they had the same kind of paper transfers, right?
Yeah, paper transfer, and you could ride for a long distance to a lot of places. Because I would go to Parkchester. You remember Parkchester?
Sure.
I remember the name.
Where was it? Lived there, and I had to take at least 2 buses to get there.
Yep.
So I remember.
It was over in the east side, Ralph, east part of the East Bronx, Parkchester. Okay. It was a nice area, and it was a pretty nice area.
Oh, yeah, very.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very, very nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if you knew the bus system, you could, and it's amazing how long that lasted with these paper transfers. I don't believe you can do that now at all, although I haven't tried it. And, of course, the fare now is about $2 and change, so it might be worth trying it to see how well it works.
I wonder what's the subway fare now?
That's about $2.50, I think.
Something like that,
yeah. We were up in New York a couple of weeks ago. I think I mentioned when we went up to go to take the train to Niagara Falls. And rather than, we lived on the subway. As kids, even teenagers, we never had any problem with our parents letting us go down to Madison Square Garden for a ball game or a circus or whatever, or go out to Yankee Stadium. We traveled on the subway, and there was no big deal. And I didn't want to get onto the system now, simply because it was too confusing. It was easy to take an Uber and go wherever you wanted. And that's what I have a friend who also he grew up 2 blocks from me. He lives in Baltimore now. He's become what's the word I'm thinking? He can't go down into the subway. He has claustrophobia. Yeah, it's claustrophobia. He can't get onto the subway when they go to New York.
Whoa.
And I've shunned it.
That's unusual, having grown up on the subway.
I know. And I haven't been on it in years. And they change, as we've talked about. What, Mike? Sorry.
I was on it, I think 4 years ago. I did use the subway, and I mean, once I knew, I was staying with a friend, and once I knew from which train to transfer from one to the other, I was fine.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't told me, it's not. Yeah, it's confusing. If you're not.
Yeah. I'm sure there are primers that you can get on the internet or on YouTube to teach you the differences between the letters and the numbers and what have you.
Well, that's changed too. You know, they've changed the designation on all the train lines, so that's another problem that you're confronted with.
Right. But how did your son get into journalism?
Well, he went to college, and that was his major.
What we were talking about, did you were obviously a guidance to him along those lines. What does it take to get to his point in life?
I don't know. He's been at it for quite some time already. And when he went to college, he majored in communications. And his first, which is, and they had a very good radio and TV setup. This was at what was then Elon College in North Carolina. Now it's Elon University, and they had a very good setup for community. And he had asked me, and this was probably the only time he actually came to me for advice. He said, should I go in for like public relations or should I go for TV and radio? And I said, go for TV and radio, because that way you can transfer from that into public relations much easier than you can the other way around. Because once you're in public relations, you don't have the skills that they have running a board or doing tape editing for newscasts. You don't have that experience, but you can always go the other way. So he majored in communications, and when he got out, he got a job with a cable station here in Fredericksburg, down the road about 30, 40 minutes, the town of Fredericksburg, and he was on air. He was doing all sorts of stand-ups and remotes, and in fact, he was sort of a one-man crew because he would take a camera and a tripod, excuse me, and he would set it up, and it had a cable that he could keep below the camera level, and he could set it on and off, and so he would shoot his own footage. And then from there he wound up in Jacksonville, Florida, and with a couple of years in Atlanta, he's been in Florida for the rest of his career.
Cool, very cool. When a son follows in a father's footsteps, so to speak.
Well, it's the only advice he's ever taken from me. So,
but it's a good one.
It was a good one. Yes, it was a good one.
It was a good one.
Right.
Michael, did your children get into show business at all?
My daughter, when she was a baby, and I mean like a few months old, played Rodney Dangerfield as a baby. True, he was doing a special, and they were doing a sketch, one where you see Rodney it's about him when he's first born, and I forget the sketch, but we knew his manager. As a matter of fact, my wife worked with his manager. So they needed a baby, and we had just had one. So they even put a little red tie around her neck.
Oh, wow.
So she made her debut at like, 10 weeks or something. And I'll tell you a story. And we kept the tie for a long time. I don't know where it is now. But the night of the taping, I went into the improvisation here in Los Angeles, obviously, and somebody came up to me and they're looking at me, and they went, I know you. So I thought, oh, maybe you saw me on TV, like a schmuck. I thought that. And I said, well, I don't know where. And then they went, oh, wait, you're Amy's father. So I had been at the taping. So at the age of 10 weeks, she upstaged me big time. You're Amy's father.
Great story.
Yeah, it was true. Then when she was, she also did some print work. She was in a magazine for a toy, and she was on, I think I've told the story. If I have, please stop me.
We won't.
She was on, somebody said, oh, she's very cute, and so Mattel was looking for a baby to put on one of their toys on the box.
Whoa.
So we took her down, and she was about 4, something like that. And when she was not even 2, she was in a lot of magazines with this toy. This was something else. And so she got the job. They said, we're going to use her, but only on the box, on the product in Italy. And I remember saying, why? And they said, well, in America we want blondes. Oh. Can you imagine that? So this is for Italy. And I said, okay, when the product comes out, could you please send us a box? And to this day, I don't know why, they said, no, we can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? Well, it's in Italy. I said, well, I know it's in Italy, but don't you have salespeople who come to the United States for meetings? And they said, yes. This is a real conversation. I said, well, have one of them take the box on the airplane. It can't be that heavy. We can't do that. And I'm like, well, this is insane. So, lo and behold, life is funny. There's a brilliant statement. A neighbor, our next door neighbor one day, knocks on the door and says, could you keep an eye on the house? We're going to Italy for 2 weeks. And I said, can you do me a favor? If you're walking around and you happen to pass a toy store like in Rome or wherever you are, could you look for Amy on the box? Well, 2 weeks later, knock on the door. There they are with the box.
Whoa.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
That is absolutely beautiful.
That's a great story. Yeah, absolutely.
But the people couldn't bring over a box. They couldn't send it in the mail.
I know. Or I said, I'll drive out to your headquarters 45 minutes away. I have no idea why. But if they had, I wouldn't have this great story.
That's true, too.
Yeah. Then when Amy was about 5 or so, almost against our better judgment, because she was a very pretty little girl. She's still beautiful.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, thank you. And
I would have chimed in, but I have not met her.
Oh, no. And so we took her for a commercial, and it was they made the kids stay for hours and hours, and I forget even if she read or they just took pictures, but we had gotten her an agent. This sounds like, typical Hollywood, but somebody said, oh, you should get her an agent. She's so pretty. Okay. So the agent calls and says, she was being very restless at the audition. before the audition, and she was walking around, and it was something. I said, what are you talking about? She's 4.5. Nobody fed the kids. Nobody did anything. Well, if you want to be like that, then I went, I'll tell you what, if I ever see you, I'm going to punch you right in the face. How can you talk about kids like that? And I hung up, and that was the end of show business. and it wasn't like she wanted it. She never asked about it, and years later, I think somebody asked her or something. Oh, once we were at a play. She was about 8 or 9, and somebody came right up with a card and said, here's my card. You have to call me. You're so pretty. But she never really wanted it. She never wanted it. And my son, who showed no interest, no, he just wasn't interested.
Oh.
So
some kids are, some kids aren't. But,
yeah, exactly.
You had good instincts. If they want to change a kid from 4.5, wandering around, looking around, imagine what it takes to build your kid into the kind of kid that's going to get a job and do well on an audition.
Well, look how many of those kids have had real emotional problems.
They're on shows and then they disappear.
That's
if
right.
you ever go on one of these auditions where there's the mothers with the kids, it's not a joke to hear these mothers talk. Malcolm went on 4 auditions yesterday afternoon, and he has 2 callbacks. And has to buy a new hat. They go on and they're sitting comparing. Well, we have to leave right from here, and it's like, oh, shut up! Talking about a 3-year-old kid, stop it.
And what happens to the egos of the adults living out their dream? Quote
exactly.
In the eyes of the kids, and that's horrible.
Well, I have to go for an audition in a few minutes, so I'm going to have to cut this short. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
But I do have an appointment.
I just want to say, don't be restless, David, when you're at the audition.
That's
wander around.
And I'll make sure I ate before I go.
I was going to say, have a nice tuna sandwich.
Yeah, tuna on rye.
Yes.
All right, guys. Next week it is. Same time.
Oh,
same
boy, that
time.
was fast. My God.
We've been on for 45 minutes.
I know. Well, time flies when you're having a good time.
That's right.
It's a good show if we're not even thinking about the time.
That's right.
Not at all.
All right. We're on.
Okay.
I think we got 12 or 15 in a row like that. So let's keep it going.
Yes,
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, yes.
Stay
First
healthy,
night
and that's the main thing.
Yep.
Don't forget to sing the dreidel song before you go to sleep.
Dreidel, 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 I made it out of
clay, and when it's good and ready, the dreidel.
My wife is down now. My wife is down. They have a menorah lighting on the ellipse in front of the White House every year. And this year I chose not to go because I'd rather be here. But the thing is, when you go down there and you sit there in these open area in the afternoon like now, it's not so bad. And you can't do this whole ceremony till the sun goes down. Well, when the sun goes down out on that open mall, the temperature drops by about 30 degrees in 2 minutes. I mean, you sit there and freeze to death. So I'm glad I'm not going this year. Cheers.
As a quick thing about how I read an article, there's an all Yiddish version, it's not a joke, of Fiddler on the Roof playing in New York.
Oh, really?
All Yiddish version, and the LA Times guy said it brought him to tears. It's so wonderful.
But he couldn't understand the words.
It was so big.
Well, they say they
York,
for titles, but I don't understand how you do that at a play.
They show it up on the screen, just like they do with above the whatever that top of the curtain, not the curtain, but the part above the curtain. So that's what I've heard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can see Tevye right now.
Okay.
On the other hand, on this hand, on the other hand.
Yeah, in Yiddish. And they said
Yiddish.
the one thing, instead of singing "If I Were a Rich Man," it says, not a joke again, it said, "If I Were a Rothschild."
Oh.
Whoa.
But the Jews in those years, if Rothschild was...
Sure.
Right. That's very interesting. It brings to mind a Trump son-in-law must have been a Rothschild.
All right, with that, I've got to sign off. I'm not going to talk about Trump anymore.
Get into that.
No.
Take care.
All right. Be well, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you everybody for listening. The name of the show is Bronx Roots, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Adios, everybody.
Bye.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.